Fergus Walsh. Well, to discuss this, we're joined by Hannah Deacon, who became the first person to legally enter the UK with cannabis oil after she travelled to Amsterdam to obtain it for her son, Alfie, who suffers from severe epilepsy. And from Newcastle, we're joined by Dr. Mike Barnes, a consultant in neurology and rehabilitation medicine, whose campaign to legalise access to medical cannabis. And Dr. Stephen Alexander joins us from Nottingham. He's an Associate Professor of Molecular Pharmacology who advised the Home Secretary on the rescheduling of cannabis for medicinal purposes. Welcome, all of you. Thank you very much. Dr. Alexander, first of all, how reluctant has the government been to make this change, even in the light of the pressure from all sorts of high-profile cases we've seen lately?
Well, I think it's kind of a difficult one to gauge the reluctance of government, but certainly there's been a quite rapid movement recently, precipitated by the events you kind of described in terms of the childhood epilepsy cases. So I think this has been something that's moved along at a much more rapid pace than people would have thought maybe 6 months ago.
Hannah Deacon, how welcome will it be, do you think, to other parents who have children like Alfie, who you believe really benefits from this?
It's extremely welcome. It's really important that the government acted so quickly and looked at the rescheduling of cannabis. I do have a grave concern about the medicines that will be available to doctors to prescribe, such as my son's medication, which is Bedrocan. You have a company called Tilray and Afria in Canada. These companies are making medical grade oil out of whole plant cannabis under legislation from those countries, and they are safe and clinically used very safely in many, many thousands of people. If those sorts of products aren't made available to doctors to prescribe, then Alfie will still need a license for his medication. So, you know, we mustn't pharmaceuticalise this. We mustn't just allow drugs that have been through these long, arduous trials, because really then, you know, parents are still going to be suffering. We're still going to be waiting many years for these drugs because it takes time to develop these drugs.
Dr. Mike Barnes is nodding as you were speaking, Hannah. What concerns do you have, Dr. Barnes, about just how much less restrictive the rules are going to be?
Well, I think Hannah's quite right. We've got to guard against this being quite restrictive. It's great news, and we've got to make sure this is not a false dawn for many thousands of people in this country who will benefit from it. And my main concern is that the government will insist that the products to be used and prescribed have to have gone through clinical trials. Now, that may sound reasonable. Actually, it's been very difficult to get clinical trials done because the drug's illegal. And if you insist on clinical trials, you'll disadvantage well over half of the people, if not more, for epilepsy only, who want a drug, who haven't been through a clinical trial process. And there's huge experience across the world now of hundreds of thousands of people in 44 countries where this is legal. And we've got to make use of that expertise, that experience, that knowledge of the safety, and not insist that it's a pharmaceutical product that goes through the clinical trial process.
Dr. Stephen Alexander, then, how do you make sure that the right products are permissible, even if they haven't been through the clinical trials that you would normally expect a drug to go through?
Well, I think, there are clinical trials that have gone on with particular preparations of cannabis. So in the United States, the Food and Drug Administration have recently licensed a cannabidiol-enriched extract for infantile intractable epilepsy. So there is evidence from other sources that could be used by the MHRA, the Medicines and Health Regulatory Authority, to inform them about the choices of particular cannabis-derived preparations that they could make available. I think one of the things that the rescheduling does is it will prompt a lot more interest in conducting properly controlled clinical trials to evaluate the benefit and ensure that we minimise risk.
Dr. Mike Barnes, how concerned are you then that some of these products, if they are whole plant and they might contain psychoactive ingredients, could get into the wrong hands, if you like, be used for the wrong purposes, recreationally?
Well, I think there's a lot of confusion out there between street cannabis and medicinal cannabis, and they're really two different products. Street cannabis is very high in THC, which we heard earlier from the Fergus report, which makes people high. Generally speaking, medicinal cannabis is much lower in THC, and more particularly, the high effect of the THC is completely counteracted by the CBD. So take the children with epilepsy, they need CBD, but they also mainly need a little bit of THC as well. But that THC is not enough to make them high. We're talking about different products here. And I don't think there's a significant risk. Obviously, there's some risk, but there's not a significant risk of these medicinal products being leaked into the recreational market. It's a different drug.
Hannah Deacon, how well informed are many of the doctors you've come across in pursuing this sort of treatment for Alfie?
Well, unfortunately, many doctors that I've come into contact with are not informed at all about this medication. And I think now we need to look at educating our doctors and our health professionals. There is a concern that this announcement yesterday talks about doctors with specialisms. I think it should go wider. I think GPs should be trained and should be allowed to prescribe this medicine. It also should be available to everyone, not just people who are very seriously ill. And one point I would like to make is that the cannabis plant works in the entourage effect. That means that all the cannabinoids are needed to get the best results. If we're talking about research into individual cannabinoids, so pharmaceutical companies, for example, can make specific drugs, then these drugs are not going to be as effective as whole plant cannabis made by companies like Bedrocan. I'm carrying on working with End Our Pain as an ambassador to, carry on this work and to ensure that people like my son will be able to get Bedrocan products on prescription, as he has done, as other people do in many, many other countries, and not have to go through this arduous fighting with people to get these medications, because they are well used around the rest of the world, and they really should be available under prescription in this country as well.
Dr. Mike Barnes, why are we lagging behind other countries then, if it is so effective?
That's a very good question, and it's puzzled me why politicians have been so slow. The evidence that they now say is enough to reschedule the drug has been out there for years. It's not new evidence. I think it comes back to that confusion between street cannabis on the one hand and medicinal cannabis on the other. They're different drugs, different products, generally speaking, and we need to recognise that difference and get this product out to the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people in this country who would benefit from it, and the sooner the better.
Dr. Alexander, what plans are there then, as far as you're aware, that with this loosening of the restrictions, to make sure that the medical profession in particular understands what's being asked of it?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think the understanding about what physicians might be able to offer in the future should be something that could be incorporated into curricula at medical schools and schools of pharmacy around the country. I think there should be an awareness of what is on the horizon. I think part of the problem is that we have so much that we have to pack into medical curricula at the moment that trying to do the horizon scanning and the future uses of new medicines is not so easy to pack in.
There will be people, though, who are concerned that if there is a change in the law regarding attitudes towards medicinal cannabis oil, how long will we wait before there's a change in attitudes politically regarding the use of recreational cannabis, which a lot of people have concerns about because of the sort of the damage it can do to some people, particularly sort of in terms of psychosis? Dr. Alexander.
Well, I think that's one of the problems that we have, is that we don't really know for sure what people on the street are taking. So what they report to us in general would be things like skunk, as has been referred to, a high THC version. But often that's not a pure substance by any means. And so it's not impossible that what they're doing is combining a variety of other things. So we don't know for sure exactly what's going on. It's absolutely logical that there would be some issues with panic attacks and psychotic episodes, because we can see that sort of thing with high THC in other circumstances. But we don't know for sure what's going on with those street versions. And I think if we can distance the pharmaceutical level consistency that we would want, where we know what the composition of the medicinal cannabis is, and that we're happy that in 5 years' time we're giving the same stuff as we're giving now, that will give us a bit more reassurance about the quality and the safety of the cannabis-derived drugs.
You nodding again, Dr. Barnes. Do you sense a change in attitude towards the recreational cannabis politically as well, or is it very much confined to medicinal uses?
I think at the moment in the UK and Europe it's mainly confined to medicinal use. I think after some years, when we've convinced the public and the politicians that actually cannabis is a safe drug generally, we've produced it to good quality, what's called GMP, good manufacturing practice standard, we can show there's consistency, we can show there's high quality, we can show the limited number of side effects, then I think it's a different debate. Whatever, 3 years, 5 years down the road, to see if we want a social change for recreational cannabis. But I wouldn't want to confuse the two at the moment. We need medicinal cannabis and we need it very soon. We need it to a high quality. Let's wait another few years for the recreational debate.
Hannah, finally to you. Tell us how Alfie is.
He's doing amazingly well. You know, he really was at a point where we thought he was going to die or have psychosis because of the intravenous steroids, ironically, that he was using every week, that he had to be given to rescue him out of his clusters. Those drugs that children are given all the time cause horrendous effects on brains and growing bodies. And, you know, that's why it frustrates me when people talk about the side effects of THC, because as Professor Mike Barnes says, you know, CBD counteracts that. So, you know, he is doing extremely well because of medical cannabis. And I speak to people every single day who are suffering, and it's got to stop. And this medication should be available very, very quickly so people can enjoy, you know, a good quality life like I am with my family and my little boy, because he's doing so amazingly well, and it is all because of medical cannabis.
Hannah Deacon, Dr. Mike Barnes and Dr. Stephen Alexander, thank you all for joining us this morning.